King Edward III, a prominent figure in history, came into the world on November 13, 1312, gracing the splendid Windsor castle located in the serene English country of Berkshire. His father was none other than Edward II, who held the titles of King of England, Lord of Ireland, and Duke of Aquitaine in the enchanting realm of France. Edward II assumed the throne in 1307 at the young age of 23, following the reign of the formidable Edward I, affectionately known as Edward Longshanks. It's noteworthy that Edward II had also fathered an illegitimate child named Adam Fitzroy around the time he became king. However, the eagerly anticipated birth of the future Edward III in 1312 was of paramount importance, as this legitimate heir was crucial for securing the royal succession. Edward III's mother was the illustrious Queen Isabella, the daughter of the esteemed King of France, Philip IV. She was born in 1295 and spent her formative years amid the splendor of the various French royal palaces near the enchanting city of Paris. At the tender age of 12, she entered into matrimony with Edward II in January 1308, just a few months into what would prove to be a tumultuous reign. The England into which the future Edward III was born in 1312 was steeped in instability. Edward I had masterfully crafted one of the most powerful kingdoms in all of the Europe during his lengthy reign between 1272 and 1307. He completed the English conquest of Wales, intervened in the affairs of Scotland, and extended English rule across the Irish Sea in the inland lands of Ireland. Additionally, he undertook comprehensive reforms of the judiciary and administration, culminating in the creation of the most centralized state in Europe during the High Middle Ages. However, the formation of this highly centralized and expanded English state under Edward Longshanks posed a significant challenge upon his demise. In 1307, his son, Edward II, emerged as a weak ruler, bestowing immense power upon a succession of favored individuals throughout his 20-year reign. This practice fueled resentment among the English nobility and the political elite. The first of these favorites, Piers Gaveston, formed a close relationship with Edward around 1300 during their teenage years. The nature of their relationship remains a subject of debate, but upon Edward's accession in 1307, Galveston was granted vast powers. He was eventually named the first Earl of Cornwall and awarded numerous offices. However, his behavior deeply offended the nobility, leading to his temporary exile to Ireland, where he served as the royal viceroy. Tragically, Gaveston met his demise in the summer of 1312, killed by two senior English nobles, the Earl of Lancaster and the Earl of Warwick. This event unfolded just months before the future Edward III's birth at the splendid Windsor castle. Yet, the years that followed did not witness any improvement in the circumstances of Edward II's rule. During the 1310s, the king began displaying a similar partiality, this time toward High Despenser, the son and namesake of the Earl of Winchester. As the Despenser family ascended to greater power in the years ahead, the English nobility's opposition to Edward II's rule grew even more fervent. Furthermore, Edward I's Hertford, gains in Scotland were abruptly undone in 1314, when the English suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of a Scottish army led by the indomitable Robert the Bruce in the Battle of Bannockburn. To compound these challenges, a devastating famine gripped England in the mid-1310s. In this turbulent environment, young Edward, born in 1312, was living through his infancy, utterly oblivious to the state of the country. Surprisingly, he was never bestowed with the title of Prince of Wales, a customary honor granted to most direct heirs to the English throne since the late 13th century. Instead, he bore the honorific title throughout his youth of Earl of Chester, a separate household independent of the royal court. He was established for Edward, and it was within the environment that he was raised. In his youth, Edward welcomed several siblings into his world. His brother John entered the world in August 1360, followed by two beloved sisters, Eleanor and Joan, in 1318 and 1321. Though scant information exists regarding his upbringing, it is likely that young Edward's education was more focused on the physical world than the world of books. While he learned to read and write both in English and French, his proficiency in Latin remained rudimentary. He may have also acquired some knowledge of Flemish and German, but as his later life would attest, his primary concerns as a youth were centered on horsemanship and martial skills. After all, this was the High Middle Ages, when a king's ability to lead his people in times of war held greater importance than his mastery of government administration minutiae. As he approached his 10th year, the political situation in England reached a breaking point. In 1321, a civil war erupted in England, largely ignited by the king's unwavering support and lavish favour bestowed upon the Despencer family and their allies. This revolt was spearheaded by Thomas, Earl of Leicester, a first cousin of the king and one of those instrumental in the downfall of Piers Gaveston in 1312. The Crown Prince Edward was accordingly proclaimed as Edward III, King of England, Lord of Ireland and Duke of Aquitaine, in the vibrant heart of London on the 25th of January. A mere week later, he received the solemn coronation rites at the majestic Westminster Abbey. All of these momentous actions were executed in the name of young Prince Edward, who had recently celebrated his 14th birthday in November 1326. Undoubtedly, Edward was but a pawn on the grand political chessboard. At this stage, with the true power in England resting firmly in the hands of his resolute mother, Isabella, her ardent lover Roger Mortimer, and their dedicated followers, Parliament had reached a consensus in January that the youthful king would rule in tandem with a council compromising 4 bishops, 4 earls, and 6 barons of the realm. However, this arrangement swiftly took a backseat to the authority of Isabella and Mortimer. This dynamic duo effectively governed England for the following 3.5 years. During the early days of Edward III's reign, numerous challenges confronted the realm. The most immediate concern was the status of the former king, Edward's father. In the late spring of 1327, he was relocated to the imposing Berkeley Castle in the picturesque country of Gloucestershire. However, a more permanent solution was imperative. Isabella and Mortimer's regime had quickly stirred unrest, particularly due to dissatisfaction with Mortimer's rising influence. This discontent began to coalesce around the idea of freeing the deposed king and restoring him to the throne. A final resolution to this matter was ultimately reached on the 21st of September 1327, when the man who had reigned over England for 2 decades as Edward II was discreetly executed on the orders of Isabella at Mortimer at Berkeley Castle. An even more formidable challenge confronted the new regime in the north. Seizing the opportunity presented by the people following Edward II's overthrow, the Scots, under the leadership of the indomitable Robert the Bruce, launched a series of raids into northern England and the crown's holding in Ireland. In the summer of 1327, young King Edward III embarked on his inaugural military campaign to the north, famously known as the Weardale Campaign, named after the river where much of it transpired. The military endeavour unfolded during July and August 1327. In the course of the campaign, James Lord Douglas, in conjunction with the Earls of Mar and Moray, led a contingent of potentially up to 10,000 Scots southward into northern England. Simultaneously, Isabella and Mortimer, now the ascendant power in England, achieved a successful campaign against the traditional feuille of Scotland as a means of legitimizing the new authority in the name of young Edward. Therefore, in mid-July 1327, they journeyed north from York with their own forces to confront Douglas and the Scots. 2 weeks of maneuvering unfolded as both sides attempted to locate each other and gain a tactical advantage in the northern English landscape. A standoff eventually occurred near the river Wear and persisted for 3 days. Then, on the night of the 3rd of August and into the early hours of the 4th, the Scottish forces launched a daring assault on the English camp, penetrating deep into the very heart of the royal encampment. During this pivotal moment, young Edward found himself perilously close to being captured by Douglas's troops. The ropes of his tent were caught, but the young monarch miraculously emerged unscathed and uncaptured. This episode marked the climax of the Weardale campaign. The Scottish attack was eventually repelled at its most dangerous juncture. Although several more days of back and forth skirmishing followed, the Weardale campaign concluded inconclusively. In early 1328, the regime was compelled to secure the northern border by agreeing to the Treaty of Northampton. This treaty saw Edward renounce the English crown's claim to the Scottish throne and recognize Robert the Bruce as King of Scotland. Despite the relative setback of the Weardale campaign, a diplomatic incident erupted in February 1328 that would have unforeseen consequences. On the first day of that month, Charles IV, the King of France and Isabella's brother, passed away. Charles IV had only left behind daughters, and it had been determined that a woman would not succeed him. This circumstance marked the end of the direct line of the Capetian kings of France, who had ruled the country since the late 10th century. With only 2 candidates to succeed Charles V, Edward III of England held the stronger claim, being a grandson of Philip IV, Isabella's father, the long-reigning king of France from 1285 to 1314. The second candidate was Philip of Peleus. As a further statement to the world of his rule, he also reedified and expanded Windsor Castle as a symbol of English royal power. Another lasting achievement was seen in the late 1340s and early 1350s, when Edward successfully steered England through the crisis wrought by the arrival of the bubonic plague in Europe. The Black Death was the greatest crisis faced by the Europe during the late Middle Ages. Perhaps as much as a third of England's population died within the space of half a decade. But rather than succumbing psychologically to the onslaught of illness and death which ravaged England in the late 1340s, Edward guided the country through this period by stabilizing the economy through the passage of the Statute of Labourers. Moreover, in strengthening the office of the Justice of the Peace in order to effectively implement the statute on the local level in England. Edward's government made a lasting contribution to English local administration, one which was subsequently exported to Ireland, North America, India and Australia in later centuries. Yet in many other ways, Edward's reign and its success were about long-term nation building. Parliament became more important during his reign, and he began to use many of the emblems which came to symbolize England itself, notably carrying the cross of St. George into battle. But perhaps Edward's greatest legacy was in the reorientation of the courts and government to favor Middle English as the language of government and officialdom in England. As a result, in the centuries that followed, when England and then Britain began settling colonies elsewhere all over the world, it was English which was spread globally as the language of England and Britain. Edward III undeniably played a pivotal role in shaping the course of the 14th century, raising the question of whether he deserved the title of England's greatest king. Do you think Edward III's significance is often overlooked today? What are your thoughts on his legacy? We would love to hear your perspective in the comments below. Thank you for joining the discussion, and please share your thoughts.